Sensor size and aspect ratios. This is another thing. They're related, but not necessarily. All right, so let's first talk about sensor size. Different DSLRs or different interchangeable lens cameras have different sensor sizes. So this is the SL1, and I kind of like showing this because it's like one of the least expensive DSLRs that you can get today that can shoot video. And this sensor is a cropped sensor. It's actually APS-C. And if you look at this image here, it shows you all the different sensor sizes. So there's APS-C for Canon over here, and then there's APS-H, and then 35mm full frame. And this is where, like, what the Canon 5D Mark II and Mark III have. And then if you look down here, the small one is micro four thirds. So these are like your GH4 or GH3 and GH2 from Panasonic. And then so the Sony cropped sensor cameras are here in the APS-C. But Sony also makes some full frame ones like the 35mm. Now, what's the big deal with all this? The sensor size affects a few things. One of them is depth of field. So the larger the sensor size, then the easier it is to create a shallow depth of field. Also, the larger the sensor is, then in many ways it's easier to get a wider angle of view. So what that means is, let's say you put a 50mm lens on this camera, the SL1, which has a cropped sensor, an APS-C. It will look more zoomed in than putting a 50mm lens on the Canon 5D Mark III, which has a full frame sensor. The other thing too is that the way the sensor is set up, as well as the way the mount is set up, this actual mount where the lens hooks up to the camera, those will affect your lens choices as well. Mirrorless systems like Panasonic and the micro four thirds systems, or Sony with their mirrorless systems, have a very short distance from the mounting point to the actual sensor. And the beauty of that is then you can make all kinds of adapters, or well, companies can make adapters that can adapt pretty much any lens to those systems, because you can always make a lens kind of push farther away from the body of the camera, but getting it closer to it is not as easy. So that's one advantage that those mirrorless systems have, is you can pretty much adapt any lens to those mirrorless systems. Also, for the micro four thirds or for these crop sensor lenses, because they're smaller sensor sizes, then that means you can take a lens that is meant to cover a larger area, and it can work so long as you were able to adapt it to that body. It can cover the full image area. If you go the other way around though, if you take a lens that was meant for a smaller image area, what might end up happening is that you get vignetting around the edges of the frame that appear as black or just very heavy vignette. So just keep in mind that, oh, and one more thing that sensor size can affect is, as a general rule of thumb, the larger the sensor size, the more sensitive to light that sensor is. It's doesn't hold always true, but it's kind of a general rule of thumb. Now, sensor size, though, does not necessarily affect resolution. You can have a full frame sensor, but maybe its resolution is only 1080p, whereas you can have a micro four thirds sensor, a small sensor, but the resolution that it's getting is 4K. So as an example, on the Canon 5D Mark III, it's a full frame sensor, but in its factory default settings, it can only shoot at 1080p resolution. Whereas the Panasonic GH4 has a micro four thirds sensor, a smaller sensor, but it can shoot at a resolution of 4K. So just something to keep in mind. Now, aspect ratio. You may have heard about aspect ratio in various things, from 16:9 or 4:3 and so on. So what that is, if you look at this image here, you will see different aspect ratios. 4:3 can also be represented as 1.33 to 1, which is this here, and you can see, so it's basically 4:3 is the ratio. And then 16:9, oh, it's not actually shown on this one, but it's 1.78 to 1. And then widescreen is 1.85 to 1. And CinemaScope is 2.35 to 1. And you can see how much wider it gets. So again, aspect ratio and resolution they're independent of each other. You can shoot on something super low resolution, but force a different aspect ratio. So back in the day, if you were shooting on like Hi8 or VHS or something, people would put like black bars on the top and bottom of the screen or the frame in order to create this sort of more cinematic widescreen look. Now, but it doesn't improve the resolution of VHS, right? You're just making the ratio of the frame size different. Hope that makes sense. So if you have any questions, please let us know, and we will be sure and try and help you guys. Thank you.